So I want to now turn to estimates of the population sizes, as that's really what a lot of people have seem to have been quite interested in, and how this thing, if you listen to the introduction, kind of how this thing all started. And my colleague has actually done a lot of work, my colleague within the ALK community has done a lot of work in this area as well. So um, I've I wanted to look at the population sizes, not just with ALK though, but also with EGFR and ROS1, and also look at validating this whole model with other data sources, because everything I've spoken about so far has just been from the NHS secondary care medicines data. So I've tried to get in some data from other sources as well. So I would also mention that a big red flag here, that what I am saying is very controversial, because it seems to contradict mainstream science. So take what I'm saying with a big shovelful of salt, really, because I don't know why um, my figures differ so much from the mainstream, but hopefully in time, in the fullness of time, that can be understood. So I'll start off with what is the most compelling evidence that something is wrong with the mainstream science. So in England, every year there's about 34,000 new lung cancer cases. That is according to the National Lung Cancer Audit. Changes a little bit from year to year, but it's about 34,000. And it's typically about 90% of those are non-small cell lung cancer. Most of the other 10% is small cell, so that gets us down to 30,600. Now, the mainstream science says that something like 3 to 5% of all non-small cell lung cancer cases are ALK positive. And last December I fed this into a question in the US ALK group. They do ALK talks quite regularly and get some experts on, so I stayed up late, and they had Dr. Ross Camage on there, who is the one of the world's most renowned ALK experts. So he was giving the talk, and I fed this question in here.
This prior to the meeting that started, and we talked about the advances that we've made with lung cancer, but the biomarker testing, there's a question here that do you truly believe that only 3 to 5% of total lung cancer is ALK related, or do you think it's lack of biomarker testing?
So I think the estimates for ALK positivity in lung cancer range from about 3% up to about 7%. And that's partly based on the diagnostic that was used. So I think you can get a slight false positive and false negative rate with ALK FISH testing. That was the earliest diagnostic. Similarly with ALK IHC testing, probably the most accurate one is next generation sequencing. And that seems to fairly consistently run about 4%. When you get that 7% number, it's because they've enriched the population. They've, only included people who have adenocarcinoma and not squamous, or only included never smokers, or done some other trick. But I do think it's running about 4%. There may be there's no racial differences that we're aware of. Whether there's geographic differences, it's hard to bear in mind. But that's where your 5,000 patient survey might help.
Yeah, it would help us definitely raise funds. So I don't want to hog the mic, but one last question I guess I have is.
So there's Dr. Camage saying it's 3 to 7%, but I'll stick with the 7% as if it's enriched, but normally it seems to be 3 to 5%, which I've seen a lot in the scientific literature. So in theory, if you do the maths, that should be something between 918 and 1530 ALK cases diagnosed per year in England. Now, some of those will be diagnosed via private medicine, but the vast overwhelming majority will be within the NHS, which is we don't really have a huge private healthcare system here. In the NHS is something like 90% plus all medical care is dealt with by them. So that's in what the theory says. But my colleague and I last October 2023, we did have some a Zoom call with somebody from the Cancer Drugs Fund, and they kindly provided us with some data about new the Cancer Drugs Fund basically fund really expensive cancer drugs in England, and of which all of our TKIs would be funded by them. So they will have very good data with about what drugs they're funding, because that's basically what they do. They provided a spreadsheet. It's broken down per hospital trust, but they wouldn't actually, understandably, provide analysis due to patient confidentiality. If it was under 10, they just put less than 10 if it was between 1 and 9, and 0 if it was 0, obviously, and then and the absolute numbers. So we got the Christie here, we got some absolute numbers, and the Clatterbridge, but most of it is just really under 10. So they did it for a number of years, so going back to 2018. The 2023 data is only for part of the year, so we can't really use it. I'm not exactly sure whether that was, we spoke to them in October 2023. I don't know whether that's 3/4 of a year's data or half a year's data or what, so I just ignore that one. But we've so these are the totals for alectinib, which is the most commonly prescribed drug for ALK. So you can see there on that one we're getting nowhere near 918 to 1530. Looking down, brigatinib, this actually seems to be second line brigatinib, because it fizzles out at the end when lorlatinib really takes over, being the main second line drug. So this is first line brigatinib. See, we're getting in the 30s, 40s. Savitinib, yeah, that's kind of as expected. It's fizzling out now because there's it's just been, alectinib and brigatinib are better options than that. And lorlatinib, which is now the main second line drug, so you can get sort of 100 or so perhaps per year. So this is nowhere near what the theoretical figures should be. So this is from what the National Lung Cancer audits say, and it's their job to accurately get that information. And this is what the Cancer Drugs Fund say there is for ALK per year, first line for ALK. One thing also, I don't know how many. There would be a bit of an issue with switching between alectinib and brigatinib and the other way round. You're allowed to do that under NICE guidelines in the first 3 months of, if you get toxicity with one of those drugs, then you're allowed to switch over to the other in the first 3 months. So there will be a little bit of that going on to confuse it, but it's not going to be a huge amount. But we're sort of way out, really. It's probably only, the actual figure is something like about 1/6 of the theoretical figure. So I just don't know there. That's the most compelling evidence that something is wrong. We've got to have a lot of caution as well, that although, as I said in the introduction, although my model produces very precise numbers, of the ALK population. That's really just a central number based upon the input criteria that I put in here and the estimates I know I use. So there's nothing like that sort of precision really, but it's it's just a ballpark figure within certain ranges. But so looking at the so what I've done here, population estimate for ALK. So I've changed those input criteria to try and see how sensitive my population size is based upon changes in the criteria. So first of all, I looked at what the theoretical population size might be based upon what I said here with about 34,000, 3 to 5%. So a low estimate for that might be just over 4,000 and a high estimate just under 12,000 using the established scientific data. Then my model, as you'll see from there, my central number is about 734 for England. But if you tweak the dosing assumptions, and you can make that number a bit higher and a bit lower. So I've changed it to what are plausible dosing assumptions. Now, as I said in I think in the method section, that with 180 milligram tablets, if you're getting one of those, that's it. You're not going to get unless there's some sort of odd trial or something going on that I don't know about. That is what you will get. You won't get any more, you won't get any less, and the same with lorlatinib. 100 milligrams is the standard dose, and you won't get any more or less than that if you're getting those tablets. Now it comes it's a bit trickier with the small fractional tablets, and with alectinib, the standard, I assumed across the whole population on average they were taking 7, with some taking 8. I mean, most people probably taking 8, some taking 6, and a few taking 4. So I've just assumed that the average is 7. But I've, if you want to make that even lower to maximize the patient population, I've put that down to 6 there. And I've done the same with the other tablets. So you can see where, so the plausible range for England using this input criteria is 640 to 891. Now, of course, this depends upon how accurate the secondary care medicines data is. I found a couple of anomalies with the Clatterbridge and the Plymouth University's Hospital Trust, which I've adjusted for. There may well be a few other anomalies in there that I've not found, but I think it's mostly, the data seems at least to make sense when you look at the annual analysis. The top 10 hospitals are the ones where you would think they would be top 10 hospitals. So Barts in London, Guy's Hospital, my hospital in London, the Royal Marsden, which is one of the major cancer hospitals in England, probably first or second, Sheffield Teaching, the Christie huge cancer hospital up in Manchester, and the Clatterbridge in Liverpool. As you know, there's that data issue that I've spoken about before. University Hospitals, Bristol. So that all makes sense, and the hospitals that you would think wouldn't have any ALK patients, like I think somewhere there's the Nightingale Hospital Trust, which was set up to treat COVID patients during the pandemic. That's still on here. Not surprisingly, they're not prescribing any ALK drugs, and children's hospitals generally don't. So most hospitals don't prescribe ALK drugs. There's about 217 hospital trusts in England. So superficially, that seems to make sense to me. going back to the population estimate. So I then grossed it up for what would it be like for the whole of the UK, because bearing in mind England is just one of the 4 countries of the UK, so add in Scotland, estimates for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, although the UK is actually about 85, England is about 85% of the population of the whole of the UK. So with the secondary care medicines data, I get a range of 823 to 1553, with the middle value being about 1100. So you know, there may well be some other issues with the data that means that it's a bit you know, perhaps those error bars should be a bit wider, but when you compare that with the figure here for what it should be for the whole of the UK, 7,500 according to the established science, see, it really is, it's, you know, it's about 1/6, isn't it? So then I've spoken earlier about the Cancer Drugs Fund. If you so I've played around with those figures. There's about 215 going on to first line drugs per year, and I've made ranges of about 190 to 204. So that's how many is going into, you know, being prescribed cancer first line ALK TKIs per year. Now, what is the time that people will typically spend on those? What is the median overall survival of patients starting those drugs? It's certainly over 3 years. I know that's certainly anecdotally. A very absolute lowest estimate I would say would be something like 4 years, but it's probably higher. Probably the central estimate would be something like 5, maybe even 6 years. High estimate could be 6 or 7 years even. I'm not sure it's much higher than that. So again, you're looking at, if you multiply that out, you're looking at a central number for the UK out population of about 1,500 compared to 1,100 for secondary care medicines data. So yeah, a bit different, but not too much difference there, and we've got quite a lot of overlap in the ranges. The last data source, I struggle to, I'm not sure I'd quite call it a data source, but there's the when people get diagnosed with diseases, gets put into the National Disease Registration Service, which is highly confidential, and people like me would never get access to that. But what has been done to help researchers is that there's something called the simulacrum has been created. This is artificial data. These are artificial patient records, so completely made up, but they're supposed to be statistically similar to the real thing. Now, how similar they are, I don't know, because I've never seen the real thing, but in theory they're supposed to be fairly similar. I downloaded the database, it's freely available, so I downloaded it and put it into Access and tried to get some reports. I've got to say I found it quite difficult to use, so I'm not confident that I'm fully understanding it, but given those huge limitations, I thought I'd just see what I could do with it. Another thing is the data, the simulated data is quite old, so bear that in mind as well. So this is what I think I got from it. So there were ALK positive biomarker testing coming back out positive for those years, simulated data for those years, and these were the total tests done, and that was the positivity rate. So that kind of is stacking up with the positivity percentage I've seen before. So if you do multiply those out for the same sort of assumptions at the top, we're getting now with this a population size, a central estimate of about 1900 population for England, using the same sort of survival criteria that I had for 5 or 6 years median survival. So as I say, take that with a pinch of salt, at least, because I don't know, it is simulated data. But so, you know, we've got the central number according to the established science, about 7,500. We've got 1,100 or so for the secondary care medicines data, about 1,500 for the Cancer Drugs Fund, and about 1,900 for the simulacrum. So all of those 3 data sources are just way lower for some reason than the theoretical number. Hopefully one day someone will be able to work that out. I did one other thing with the secondary care medicines data and the Cancer Drug Fund data. I looked at I've got this figure of 215 new patients per year, so I divided it by the theoretical population, the theoretical England population, 215 England patients per year. So I divided it by the theoretical England population to try and get an idea of the England population on first line drugs, to see what is the period of time spent on those first line drugs according to this. So first line drugs, alectinib, brigatinib, and ceritinib was originally for a while. So my estimates for this, the central estimate was 3.6 years spent on a first line drug, with ranges of 3.1 years, 4.2 years. Now I'm dividing one uncertain number by another uncertain number, so you're probably going to get an even more uncertain number. So it's not, you have to take this with, you know, an even bigger shovel full of salt, really. But this isn't too far away from what I would expect. Now the Alex trial, I think it was, for alectinib, showed progression-free survival of about 35 months, median progression-free survival first line. I believe brigatinib is very similar as well. So bear in mind also, upon a progression event, you don't automatically go on to lorlatinib. It's common practice to try and stay on that first line drug as long as you can by treating, especially if it's oligoprogression in one or a small number of sites, to use something like radiotherapy to try and treat those 1 or 2 or whatever small number of progression events. So in practice, although the median progression-free survival might be 35 months, you may well get another 6 months, another year on that first line drug. But what I would also say is that these population sizes that I've got with the secondary care medicines data are actually quite depressed, or are a bit depressed, because we know some people seem to spend a long time on these drugs. Unfortunately, some people can progress even within a year, but some people happily on drugs for, the same drug for 7 years, and who knows, they may well be on the same drug for another 7 years. But as we can see here, a lot of these drugs, I mean, alectinib was approved in 2018, brigatinib 2021, ceritinib 18, lorlatinib 2020, and then we also had crizotinib a bit earlier. But these are relatively recent in the grand scheme of things. If we'd had all of these drugs, say, in the year 2000, then our UK population, our England population here, would probably be quite a lot higher. There'd be some long survivors from 2010, 2012, 2015, who sadly passed away because they just didn't have these modern drugs in those days. So I could quite conceivably imagine that if those drugs had been around back in those days, that these numbers could well be a third higher, or the latest one could be a third higher than it would otherwise be. Now, if you was to feed that into this, then you then get a number for a central estimate, which is probably what I would expect for first line use of alectinib and brigatinib in the real world. So, okay, I'm manipulating the data. I don't really know the true, how much bigger the population really would be if those drugs have been around for a long time, but it would certainly be bigger than it is now if they'd been around, say even 10 years earlier. Then I did the same with lorlatinib, second line drug, or possibly in some cases third line drug for a few people if they went on to crizotinib or ceritinib in the early days. Now, I got a central estimate of about 1.6 years on lorlatinib. I've not really been able to find any data that says what the typical median survival on second line lorlatinib is, but anecdotally that feels about right. So I think that that is about there. Something else actually I have done on ALK, which I've not done on any of the others, is I've done a rolling a 6-month rolling average. There's this site here which uses the secondary care medicines data, and it seems to put it out, does this little site on a monthly basis. So last updated December 2023, but I'll when the more data comes in for 2024, I can update the monthly figures. So I've put that into this. So starting at the bottom, that was the raw data. No, sorry, that's not. That's the raw data. The red is where I've adjusted for lorlatinib. The blue is where I've adjusted for the clatter. The red is where I've adjusted for the Plymouth University Hospitals anomaly. Blue is where I've adjusted for the Clatterbridge anomaly, which is ongoing. Purple is where there is Clatterbridge and Plymouth, and the green here is where there's some negative numbers, and I just removed those. So it was a bit weird where it just went negative, but mostly affecting lorlatinib, which is not the biggest drug. So then I aggregated these into the different drugs, and I get an estimate, a 6-month rolling estimate for how many people are on these drugs. Now again, as I say, these are all just central numbers. You shouldn't really regard these as particularly accurate, but it's just what the central number is. So for lorlatinib, we seem to have reached steady state some while back. So in probably spring 2022, it seems like it stopped growing, or well, possibly you could say it's still growing in April, May 2023, 171, 177 in March 23, but then we're into the 150s by late 2023. So I think we've reached steady state there. Ceritinib, as you'd expect, is gradually going down because it's not been really the drug of choice since 2018 when alectinib was August 2018 when alectinib was approved by NICE. Brigatinib has been gradually going up, slowly climbing over time, slowly climbing. And then our main drug, alectinib, has been climbing right from the start and is still climbing now. So we've got a climbing first line population of alectinib and brigatinib. So I presume this population is growing because people are just living longer on those. Some people are living a real long time on those two drugs, whereas with lorlatinib, the time that you spend on it is generally lower than it is on the first line drugs. So unfortunately, we've reached steady state there, and it's not really growing anymore. That's what it's like if you map it out on a chart. So yeah, that's what it is with ALK. I've done the same with EGFR. So where are we here? So population estimate. So the same sort of thing here. The theoretical population size of there should be about 19,000 people, EGFR patients as a central number, according to the established science. So I think EGFR is supposed to be, whereas ALK is 3 to 5%, EGFR is about 10 to 15%, so much bigger size. But again, we get a very small population here, a lot lower than I would have thought. It looks like I haven't actually updated this for the 2023 data, so I think this is 2022 data. Yeah, so 2023 is a population of 2,044, whereas 2022 was 1,812. So I've got 1803 anyway. So I need to update with that with the 2023 data, but it's not going to be too much different. Here we have a central estimate for the whole of the UK of about 2,600. I haven't got any Cancer Drugs Fund data. Simulacrum, I did the same thing again, so we're getting about 10% positivity for those particular years. So if you use secondary care medicines data, 2,600, simulacrum population of just under 5,000. I've used, I think, survival with EGFR drugs is a little bit lower, I think, than ALK. Although it's got better now in the era of osimertinib, but I think it is a little bit lower, so I've reduced those numbers a bit. So put 3 years to 5 years as the ranges. So there we are, 18,600 versus 1803 using 2022 data, or just under 5,000 using the simulacrum data. So again, way out. Probably less than a third, isn't it, of what it should theoretically be. I've also done, oh, actually, I'll go on to show you the annual analysis as well. Again, it's the same sort of hospitals that you would expect, often in the top 10. It's slightly unusual with East Suffolk being so high, but Guy's, Royal Marsden, Birmingham, University Hospitals, Birmingham, Sheffield Teaching, the Christie, the Clatter Bridge, which we had that data issue there, so that's just stayed the same since 2020. Royal Surrey, and down the bottom you can see I've done the percentage of patients that are actually treated at these top 10 hospitals. So we've got about a third or so of patients tend to be treated at those top 10 hospitals. So lastly, I've done the same with ROS1. So let's get that up. It's not that one. Oh, EGFR, it must be this one. Yep, ROS1. So population estimate, exactly the same sort of thing. Now there's a population size is quite as for ROS1 is quite a lot lower than ALK, and certainly a lot lower than EGFR. There's also, as I said in the ROS1 section, there is the uncertainty that crizotinib was historically used as to treat ALK, and there will undoubtedly still be a few ALK patients on it. Entrectinib, I think, is also used to treat NTRK. I'm not entirely sure whether it's done in the UK, but I've also heard of cases, I think certainly in the US, where they use lorlatinib for ROS1. I can't see that NICE have prescribed it for ROS1, but maybe I've missed that. But so possibly lorlatinib is being used. Maybe it's on a it's been approved by NICE, or possibly it's being used on an experimental basis. So it's there's a bit more uncertainty with this small ROS1 population. So the theoretical data, from what I could see, ROS1, where's the percentage? ROS1 is quite rare, so it's the established science. It says it's about 1 to 2% of all non-small cell lung cancers. So you've got a mid-range for the population size of about 2,800. My secondary care medicines data puts a mid-range number of only 161. Again, I think I've not updated. Actually, my maps are a little bit even lower than that, so I think I need to update that. But it's tiny anyway, so a tiny fraction. Oh no, this is what it's. So that's the England. There we are. That's the England population. Was 110 using the 2022 data. It seems to have dropped a bit for 2023, and then if you gross that up for the whole of England and add in people using private healthcare and such, and so there's probably a UK population of about 160 using 2022 data compared to 2,800 that it should be in theory. I did the same sort of thing again with the simulacrum for what it's worth. And we're getting these low positivity percentages of about 1%, which makes sense. But there's these number of new patients per year according to the simulacrum, so very small there. One thing I would also say, actually, with a few of these, certainly with ALK, is that I do know of cases where people are ALK positive, so they've must have had a biomarker test that comes back ALK positive, where it isn't non-small cell lung cancer, so there's some other type of cancer that is positive. So I don't know. I presume these for all of the lung cancers that so all of the positive biomarker results that I've got here from the simulacrum I've assumed that they're all for non-small cell lung cancer, but in reality there's probably some for other types of I think there's like neuroblastoma can be ALK positive as well sometimes, and all sorts of things. So some of those numbers from the simulacrum might include other types of cancer that are ALK positive but not lung cancer. So but I've got I can't understand, I can't interpret the simulacrum data sufficiently well at the moment to understand which ones would be lung cancer and which ones wouldn't, but it is what it is. It's, bearing in mind that this is only simulated data, so we shouldn't place too much reliance on it. But anyway, so looking at the simulation lacrum data, we got a population mid range of 237 with ranges 99 to 472. So again, it's way out of the so it just looks to me like all of these percentages are far lower than what they should be in theory. Now I don't know. I guess I must have just done something wrong, something fundamentally wrong here. But unless the established science just isn't for some reason isn't quite as relevant in England. But I really don't know why that is, and hopefully one day somebody will be able to answer that question.